Hi, this is Justin Curran, your host at Reclaiming Christendom. Do you remember the wonderful carol service we told you about that took place in London this weekend? Well, it went off great, but the Church of England and a lot of the leftists went into a complete panic attack that this took place. Now, this is weird, right? You'd think it would be the opposite, that the Church of England would be happy that there's a Christian celebration taking place in London. But that's not the case. Now, Tommy Robinson did a great job organizing this service. He got great singers, great speakers, including a good friend of mine, Bob of Speaker's Corner. So everything went well. So why were these leftists and why was the Church of England having this meltdown, foaming at the mouth, acting in bizarre manners, just because there's a carol service in London during Christmas? Well, let my colleague Gavin Ashenden give you his take and tell you why they're panicking. Prepare to be shocked.
Hello, I'm Gavin Ashenden. This is Reclaiming Christendom, and here are dispatches from the UK. There's been a great deal of interest in the carol service that was held a few days ago, which had the intention of putting Christ back into Christmas. I've never known a carol service which sparked protests before from other Christians. And what was strange about this was that it was going to take place in Whitehall, in the middle of London, intended to be an outdoor carol service with carols, traditional readings, traditional prayers, a few traditional talks from a few traditional clergy. And it sparked a political and religious protest, which I'll explain in a moment. But I want, by way of explaining it, to take you to an outbreak of mass hysteria in 1518 in Strasbourg. It's one of my favorite examples. A long time ago, I used to be a psych professor at university and dealing in the psychology of religion. Not many people know about this, but it's very interesting indeed. So in 1518, a mother and a daughter in Strasbourg began to dance in the streets. And they couldn't stop dancing. And then they were joined by others. And an outbreak of mass dancing, which lasted for weeks without end, took place. People died. They dropped dead from strokes and heart attacks. Nothing would stop it. It was the most extraordinary event of what, well, you might call it mass hysteria. There have been a number of different attempts to explain what took place. Some of the more reductionist ones was that it was food poisoning and some kind of stimulant entered the diet. Interestingly enough, obviously there was a metaphysical analysis, and it was only when exorcisms and deliverance took place that the thing died down. We don't know what the cause was, but as an example of human beings losing it in terms of what we describe as mass hysteria, whether or not it had any form of demonic influence, it just stands out as being the most extraordinary phenomenon that human beings are capable of doing this. And because one of the things we do nowadays is say, well, this was the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, all kinds of superstitious things happened. Except that we seem to be in the middle of an outbreak of mass hysteria, and it's to do with refugees. So let me tell you a little bit more about this service. One of the reasons why it produced such an extraordinary response was because Tommy Robinson organized it. Now, actually, he was hardly there at all. And in fact, one of the things I've done is to have a small clip of the last few moments of the service where a girl aged about 11, I think, takes a microphone and she talks about Jesus and having Jesus in your veins.
We've got one more speaker.
Hello all. I would like to say Merry, Merry Christmas. God is watching, very, very proud of us as we all stand today. I am very, very grateful of Tommy Robinson for organising this. Otherwise, I would not have hope in our patriots to do this today. All I want to say is God is in our veins, whether you like it or not. God gives us adrenaline. Wherever we are, God gives us adrenaline. God is with us. Wherever you like it, wherever you are, pray to God and he'll come to you, and he will enter your life, and he will save your life. Amen.
Tom is standing beside her, but up until that point he hadn't appeared. It had all been run by friends of his, musicians, singers, clergy, and it was very low key and rather beautiful. Several thousand people were there, we think. The authorities put the figure at 1,000, so let's triple it, on the grounds that they usually manage to underestimate and choose 30%. But anyway, somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 people. And many of them turned up, as we've seen from some of the interviews, because they felt that Christianity was being marginalized in Britain, that special treatment was being given to Islam, and they wanted to pay their respects to Jesus at Christmas. No politics, not a word. Interestingly enough, however, the Church of England, the Anglicans, the Methodists, mainly the liberal Protestants, found themselves engaged in a fury of response, what I think must be described as a form of collective group hysteria. So first of all, they then did the reverse projective thing and accused this putting the Christ back into Christmas of being profoundly political. Now, why was it political? They said because there was no talk of refugees. You can't have a carol service, they insisted, without refugees at the center of it. After all, reaching into their background knowledge of what they remember of the Bible, which doesn't seem to be very much, they said the Holy Family were refugees. Ergo, that proves that Christmas must be a refugee occasion. In fact, a hit group were put together to respond with posters which said Christ has always been in Christmas, for he was a refugee. And then they put up lots of posters of refugees in the Holy Family as refugees. But the biscuit was taken, the pièce de résistance, the ultimate stupidity, I would say blasphemy actually, was when young Anglicans, which I think probably means anyone under 70, decided they'd have a counter-protest. Because that's what you do with carol services at Christmas. You organize counter-protests to the one you don't like. And they decided they would meet outside St. Paul's Cathedral, and they would have there a people smuggler's dinghy. And in the people smuggler's dinghy, they would put the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, and they'd put them in orange life vests. And there they would come and salute the iconic refugees. It doesn't seem to have occurred to anybody to ask what a refugee is, or was there any difference in the way that the Holy Family did their refugee thing from what's happening today in the West? So let me remind you of how the Holy Family were refugees. Well, they fled, it's true, from where they were, from where Jesus was born, where Joseph was registered, and there were 3 of them, and they went to Egypt. And they lived in Egypt, we think in Zaytun, partly because there's a church in Zaytun where Our Lady appeared very dramatically in 1968. But that's another story. They stayed there for a few years, and then they returned to where they'd come from. They didn't attempt any demographic takeover. They didn't attempt to impose Judaism on the Egyptian religious system. And they didn't stay, they returned. In every single respect, apart from the fact they traveled a few miles, they're different from the phenomenon of refugees today. For in the West, the so-called refugees come by the millions. They're not fleeing persecution. Most of them come from France, And France is a very nice place to live. It's just they prefer the social benefits in England at any rate. And so they come to England claiming asylum, claiming refugee status when they are, in fact, an entirely different form of mass migratory movement. But these distinctions are not ones, they're too subtle to be grasped by mainstream liberal religious Protestants. You just have to say the word refugee and they start their political dance and they can't stop. It may be that only holy water and exorcism will work for this particular outbreak of mass hysteria in our age. But we do live in a situation where essentially liberal Protestantism has lost the Christian plot completely. The state has turned against Christianity formally and laid its weight to Islam. In our case, we're expecting any day to be given legislation that will turn criticism of Islam into criminal blasphemy. Wait for the next report on that. And where the Christians, in this particular case, encouraged by Tommy Robinson, who found Jesus about 4 or 5 months ago and has offered his love for Jesus to the fellow people in his land. You had this wonderful moment when the Church of England denounced this carol service as being well, they didn't use the word despicable, but that was the tone of voice, but they accused it of outrageous Christian nationalism. Because it's not like the Church of England is an expression of Christian nationalism. After all, it was a church built for the nation and it was Christian. You couldn't really have a more effective example of Christian nationalism than the established Church of England. For it to point its fingers at this simple carol service built on a small stage in the middle of Whitehall with people singing carols to Jesus and to cry it as something beyond acceptable because it was run by, they didn't say white, but they meant it. Not that there were only white people on the stage, as you'll see, because it was run by so-called Christian nationalists, was just quite extraordinary. So we live in a period not of just a contradiction, but frankly of madness. I'm willing to put it down to mass hysteria, but I wouldn't take much persuasion for me to describe it or discern it as something really rather seriously demonic. But that's the authoritative area of one of my other colleagues. I'll leave it to him to cast his opinion when the time comes. Meanwhile, that's the UK today. And as we approach it, I wish you at the tail end of Advent, or whenever you're listening to this, a very happy Christmas.
So there you have it. Anything close to true Christianity leads them into a panic. Anything but the true faith of Christianity. So congratulations once again to Tommy Robinson, to Bob of Speaker's Corner, and to the rest of the wonderful speakers and singers who did a great job bringing carols and Christmas joy to London. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Reclaiming Christendom. We've got a lot of great videos coming up. Thank you, and God bless.